The morning her father-in-law walked into her cafe and told her she was raising his grandson wrong, Laurel didn't cry. She just set down the coffee carafe very carefully, the way she always did when her hands wanted to shake. "He needs a man in his life," Gerald Whitmore said, loud enough that the couple by the window looked up from their cups. "Not a mother playing pretend at running a business." Laurel looked at him. She'd been looking at Gerald Whitmore for 11 years. First as the woman his son brought home, then as the woman his son married, then as the woman his son left. She knew the architecture of his disappointment by heart. "Declan's doing fine," she said. "He's 7 years old, and he cried at his baseball tryout." "He's 7 years old," she repeated, and turned back to the espresso machine. Gerald left without ordering anything. He always did. That evening, Laurel sat on the porch steps of the little house on Sycamore Street while Declan ate his dinner inside. She could hear him through the screen door, narrating some elaborate game he was playing with his plastic dinosaurs, giving each one a distinct voice. The Triceratops apparently had strong feelings about territory. The Brachiosaurus was more of a philosopher. She pressed her thumb into the groove of a loose nail on the step. 11 years. She'd given 11 years to the Whitmore name and gotten back a son she loved more than breathing, and a divorce that Gerald treated like a personal insult, as if she had left his son on purpose, as if she had any say in the matter when Trent walked out with a duffel bag and an explanation that lasted 45 seconds. She didn't play pretend at running a business. She'd built hollow grounds from nothing, a corner space on Millard Avenue that used to be a shoe repair shop, with floors she refinished herself on weekends and a menu she wrote and rewrote 17 times before she was satisfied. 3 years now, the cafe had regulars. It had a reputation. It had kept her and Declan warm through 2 Montana winters, when warm was not something that came easy. Inside, the Brachiosaurus said something deeply philosophical about acorns. Laurel almost smiled. She met Owen Breck on a Tuesday in October, which felt like an insignificant detail until later, when insignificant details started to matter. He came in just before the lunch rush with paint on his forearms and sawdust in his hair, and ordered a black coffee with the air of a man who'd been awake since before the question had come up. He sat at the counter, not a table, which most new customers chose, and he read something on his phone and didn't bother her, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. "You do the floors yourself?" he asked, when she came to refill his cup. She glanced down. Is it obvious? Only that somebody cared. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the grain of the wood near the window, the way it caught the October light. "You used a hand planer on that section? Most people don't bother." "I didn't know what I was doing," she admitted. "I just kept going until it looked right." He nodded like that was a philosophy he recognized. His name came up the next time he came in, which was Thursday, because Penny from the bookshop next door came in at the same time and apparently knew him, called him Owen, asked about his mother's kitchen cabinets, told him he looked terrible, and did he want a scone. He said yes to the scone. Laurel filed away the name without deciding to. He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. By November, she knew. He was a Finnish carpenter. He'd grown up in Billings, moved to Harlow Creek 6 years ago for a job that turned into a life. He had a sister who called too often, and a dog named Biscuit who had anxiety during thunderstorms. He read history books for fun and had opinions about the Lewis and Clark expedition that he'd shared unprompted one morning when the cafe was quiet, and Laurel had made the mistake of asking what he was reading. She didn't mind the mistake. She told herself she didn't mind because he was a good customer and an interesting person, and there was nothing complicated about any of it. She was a reasonably intelligent woman. She should have known better than to tell herself things like that. Declan met him by accident in December. Laurel had been at the cafe late. The espresso machine had developed an ominous clicking sound, and she was trying to diagnose it before morning, and her babysitter had dropped Declan off because her own shift at the grocery store had changed. Declan arrived in his winter coat and his dinosaur backpack and immediately assessed the situation with the focused practicality of a 7-year-old who had spent a lot of time in this building. "Do you need help?" he asked. "I need a new espresso machine," Laurel said. but tonight I'll settle for figuring out where the clicking is coming from. Is it the pump? Said Owen from the counter. She turned. She'd forgotten he was there. He'd come in late, said he was finishing a quote, nursed a coffee in the corner for an hour. He was looking at the machine with the same expression he got when he looked at interesting woodwork. Diagnostic. Patient. I have no idea if it's the pump, she said. Can I look? She should have said no. It was after 9 o'clock, and she barely knew this man, and Declan was watching with the transparent interest of a child who has decided an adult situation is relevant to him personally. She said yes. Owen spent 20 minutes with the machine while Declan sat on the counter beside him. She'd lifted him up without thinking, the way she always did when he was in the kitchen, and she needed him out of the way but nearby, and asked Owen questions about every single tool he touched. Owen answered all of them, not in the impatient way adults sometimes answered children's questions, treating them like interruptions. He answered like the questions were reasonable, because they were. It's the steam valve, Owen said finally. Seal's going. It's an easy fix. You can order the part online, it'll run you about $40. Or I can take a look Saturday if you want a second opinion. You fix espresso machines? Laurel asked. I fix things, he said, and shrugged. And she noticed for the first time that he had a good face for shrugging. It didn't look like dismissal on him. It looked like honesty. Declan looked at Laurel. Laurel looked at Declan. Say thank you, she said. Thank you, Declan said. Then, immediately. Do you know about dinosaurs? Owen said he knew a little about dinosaurs. An hour later, she locked up the cafe and walked to her car and thought, I am in very significant trouble. The thing about being a single mother who had also been left was that you developed a specific relationship with the word careful. Careful was how you budgeted. Careful was how you talked to Declan about his father, not angry, not sad, just factual and gentle, giving him the version of the truth that a 7-year-old could hold. Careful was how you approached the possibility of anything new, because the last time you'd let yourself stop being careful, you'd ended up alone with a child and a cafe and a father-in-law who told you were doing everything wrong. Laurel had been careful for 3 years. She was trying very hard to be careful now. Owen fixed the steam valve on Saturday. He refused payment, so she gave him lunch, the good soup she made on Saturdays, the one with the roasted tomatoes and the thyme from the pot on her windowsill. He ate it standing at the counter because she didn't open officially until noon, and there was nowhere to sit that wasn't a customer seat. You don't have to keep feeding me, he said. You fixed my espresso machine for free. It was 40 minutes. It was 40 minutes I didn't have, she said simply. He looked at her then, not the quick looks he gave her across the counter, but a longer one, like he was adding something up. She looked back because she was tired of looking away. I'd like to take you to dinner, he said, if that's something you'd want. The careful part of her said, think about this. Think about Declan. Think about what it costs when things go wrong. The careful part of her was not wrong to say these things. She had learned the hard way that the careful part was not wrong. She said, I'd want that. Dinner was Italian, at the small place on 5th that had checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles, the kind of restaurant that had no ambitions about being anything other than what it was. Owen ordered the gnocchi. She ordered the linguine. They talked for 3 hours, and she lost track of time in the way she hadn't lost track of time in longer than she could remember. He told her about the house he was building, not for a client, for himself, on a piece of land he'd bought 2 years ago outside of town. He was doing most of it alone, on weekends and evenings the way she'd done the cafe floors, slowly, getting it right. How long will it take, she asked. He considered this honestly. I don't know. Maybe 2 more years, maybe 3. I keep changing my mind about things. What kind of things? The porch. He looked slightly embarrassed. I've redrawn the porch 4 times. I want it to be the kind of porch where you actually want to sit. She thought about her own porch steps on Sycamore Street, the loose nail, the way she sat there some evenings just to breathe. What makes a porch a real porch? She asked. It has to be wide enough to do nothing on, he said. That's the thing most people get wrong. They make them too narrow, like they're apologizing for the space. She looked at him across the checkered tablecloth and thought, Here is someone who thinks about the same kinds of things I think about. Not the same things, the same kinds of things. Space and patience and getting something right even when no one is watching. When he walked her to her car, he said, "Can I call you?" She said yes. She was careful about the way she said it, not eager, not cool, just honest. She was getting tired of performing indifference toward things she didn't feel indifferent about. He called the next morning, which she hadn't expected, not to ask anything, just to tell her he'd driven past a bakery on the way to a job site and thought about the sourdough she'd mentioned and had she ever tried making it herself. She hadn't. He said it was easier than people made it sound. It was such a small thing. She stood in her kitchen while Declan ate his cereal and she thought, this is the kind of small thing that changes things. She was right about that too. Gerald found out in February because Gerald found out about everything eventually. It was Harlow Creek. The town was not large and the cafe was not invisible. He came in on a Thursday morning, which was becoming a pattern. He ordered coffee this time, which she took as a sign that he planned to stay long enough to make his point. "I hear you're seeing someone," he said. "I hear a lot of things," she said, and pulled his espresso. Declan told Patricia. Patricia was Gerald's wife, Trent's mother, a woman who had always been kinder to Laurel than her husband, but who had a particular talent for passing information between family members with the efficiency of a municipal water system. "Declan is 7, Laurel said. "He doesn't have a filter yet. Who is he? This carpenter? His name is Owen Breck. He's a good person." Gerald wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Laurel," he said, in the tone he used when he was about to explain something she already understood, "Declan needs stability. He doesn't need you bringing men in and out of his life." She had thought about this. She had lost sleep over this. She had sat on her porch steps in January cold thinking about nothing else. She had been so careful not to let Owen and Declan's interactions become routine, careful to keep things measured, careful not to let Declan start to rely on a person whose presence she couldn't guarantee. She said, "I know what Declan needs." "Do you?" "I'm with him every day," she said. "I know what he eats for breakfast and what scares him in the dark and what makes him laugh until he can't breathe. I know him in every way a person can know another person." She picked up the carafe. "And I know that what he needs is to see the people in his life treat each other with respect. So I'd appreciate it if you'd treat me with some." Gerald left without finishing his coffee. She stood at the counter for a moment. Her hands were not shaking. She hadn't expected that. The thing she hadn't told Gerald, the thing she hadn't told anyone, really, except in the vague and careful way she told Penny next door, in the shorthand of two women who had known each other long enough to communicate in partial sentences, was that she was scared, not of Owen, of herself, of the specific version of herself that kept wanting to tell him things, kept looking for his truck in the parking lot on Tuesday mornings, kept thinking about the porch he was redesigning for the 4th time, and whether the final version would be wide enough to sit on and do nothing. She was scared because the last time she'd felt like this, she had been 24 and naive in the particular way of someone who has never had her foundation taken out from under her. She was not 24 anymore. She knew what it felt like to have the foundation go. She did not want to know that feeling again. Owen picked up on it because Owen paid attention to things. They were at his land one Sunday afternoon in March. He'd brought her out to see the progress, which was more than she'd expected, the bones of something real rising out of the frozen ground. And she was quiet in a way that wasn't her ordinary quiet. He stopped talking about the load-bearing walls and looked at her. "You went somewhere," he said. "I'm here," she said. "You're here, but you're not." He didn't press it. He just left the door open. She looked at the frame of the house, the way it stood against the gray Montana sky, incomplete and yet somehow entirely itself. "I'm waiting," she said finally, "for the part where this goes wrong." He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone who doesn't know what to say. The quiet of someone choosing carefully. "I know you were left," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not telling you I'm different," he said. "I know everyone says that. I'm just telling you I'm not in a hurry to be anything other than what I am, and what I am is someone who wants to be around you. For as long as that's something you want, That's a very patient thing to say. I'm a patient person, he said simply. I built a porch 4 times to get it right. I can wait for the things that matter. She looked back at the frame of the house. Something in her chest moved, not the sharp crack of something breaking, but the slow shift of something settling, like wood finding its grain. Show me where the porch is going to be, she said. He smiled, not the wide kind, but the real kind, the one that reached, and pointed. Spring came to Harlow Creek the way it always did, reluctant at first, then all at once, like a decision finally made. The snow went, and the mud came, and then the mud went, and then everything was impossibly green. Declan's baseball tryout was in April, the same one he'd cried at last year, which Gerald had used as evidence of something. Laurel drove him there on a Saturday morning, with his cleats tied twice and his hat on crooked, and his stomach full of the banana pancakes she made on tryout days. I might not make it, Declan said in the car. You might not, she agreed. He looked at her sideways. He'd been expecting something different, the automatic reassurance, the of course you will, baby. You're supposed to say, I'll do great. You'll try great, she said. That's what I know for sure. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is Owen coming? Her hands adjusted on the wheel. Owen had offered. She'd told him she'd let him know, which was the careful version of I need to think about this. Do you want him to? Declan thought about it with the seriousness he gave to everything important. Yes, he said, but only if you do. She called Owen at the next red light. He was there by 10:15, standing at the chain-link fence with a cup of coffee from Hollow Grounds that he'd picked up on his way, which meant he'd been planning to come regardless of whether she called, and had simply been waiting to be invited. She understood that about him now, the way he made space without pushing into it. Declan made the team. Not the starting lineup, the coach said, but the team. He came off the field with his hat still crooked and his face doing the complicated math of trying not to show how much it mattered. Laurel hugged him. Owen crouched down to his level and said, That third catch was the one. Did you feel it? Declan had felt it. His face said so, even before his mouth did. That evening, the three of them ate burgers at the picnic table behind the café. She kept a folding one there for the good weather, and Declan talked without stopping for 45 minutes about the season, the team, the coach, and a tangential story about a kid named Marcus who had a very interesting approach to batting stance. Owen listened to all of it, not the performative listening of an adult indulging a child, the real kind. Later, after Declan was inside doing his reading, Laurel sat across from Owen at the table in the fading light and couldn't think of anything she needed to say. It was the specific silence of not needing to fill silence. She'd forgotten that was possible. Thank you for coming, she said. I wanted to be there, he said. She looked at him. The April light was doing something soft to everything. I know, she said. That's what I'm thanking you for. Gerald came in one more time in May. She'd been expecting it. He'd heard, through Patricia, through Trent, who had a new girlfriend, and an apparent renewed interest in Declan's emotional well-being now that someone else was taking an interest, that Owen had been at the baseball tryout, that Declan talked about him, that things were becoming, in Gerald's language, regular. He sat at the counter. He ordered his coffee. He looked at her in the way that used to make her feel like she was waiting to be graded. I owe you an apology, he said. She waited. What I said before about you playing pretend, that wasn't fair. He wrapped his hands around his cup. Gerald Whitmore was not a man built for apologies. She could see the structural effort it required. You've done right by that boy. Whatever else I might, whatever else, you've done right by him. Laurel set down the carafe. Thank you, Gerald. I don't know this man, he said. The apology, apparently, had a condition attached. Declan's talking about him like he hangs the moon. I just want to know that he's a good person. He is, she said. How do you know? She thought about the steam valve. The porch, redrawn 4 times. The way he answered Declan's questions like they were reasonable. The way he'd said, I'm not in a hurry to be anything other than what I am. The way he waited to be invited instead of pushing through the door. The same way you know anything, she said. You pay attention over time. Gerald looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and drank his coffee and didn't say anything else. For Gerald, that was practically a benediction. The porch was finished in June. Owen called her on a Sunday morning and said, "It's done, if you want to see it." She brought Declan. She brought the good coffee in a thermos and a box of the lemon bars she made on Sundays, the ones Declan kept requesting, even though they were technically for the café. She drove out to the land in the blue early summer morning, the kind of Montana morning that made you remember why anyone ever stayed. The house was further along than she'd expected. It wasn't finished. The interior was still rough, the wiring still showing, but it was undeniably itself now. You could see what it was going to be. And the porch was exactly what he'd said it would be. Wide enough to hold 3 people, 2 mugs, 1 thermos, 1 box of lemon bars, and a great deal of the particular comfort that comes from not needing to be anywhere else. She sat in one of the 2 chairs he'd put out there, not the temporary kind, the real kind, the kind meant to stay, and looked out at the land. The mountains were doing what Montana mountains did in June, which was look improbable and true at the same time. Declan immediately went to investigate a suspicious rock formation at the edge of the property. Owen sat in the other chair and poured coffee and didn't say anything for a while. "You got it right," she said finally. "The porch?" "The porch." He looked at it, the width of it, the way the light came across the boards. "I almost went narrower," he said. "4th version. I almost talked myself into narrower. What stopped you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I kept thinking about the people who'd be sitting on it," he said, "that it needed to be big enough for whatever came." She looked at him. He was looking at the mountains. She thought, here is a man who plans for whatever comes, who redraws things 4 times, not because he can't make up his mind, but because he refuses to apologize for the space, who waits at fence lines with coffee, who answers children's questions like they're reasonable, who says I can wait for the things that matter and means it in the literal, structural sense, the way a foundation means it. "Owen," she said. He looked at her. "I'm glad you were patient with me." Something moved in his face, the same thing she'd felt in March, watching the frame of the house against the gray sky. Not dramatic, just true. "You were worth the patience," he said. Declan yelled something from the rock formation. It was either, "I found a fossil," or "there's a snake." At this distance, she couldn't be sure which. And she stood up and called back, and Owen was already on his feet, and for a moment the 3 of them were in motion at the same time, toward the same thing, in the particular easy way of people who have gotten used to moving through space together. Later, after the rock turned out to be just a rock, after the lemon bars were gone, after Declan fell asleep on the drive home with his head against the window, she sat in her parked car in front of the house on Sycamore Street and let herself feel the thing she'd been careful about feeling. It felt like the porch, wide enough for whatever came, built by someone who'd thought about who would be sitting on it. She pressed her hand against the loose nail on the step when she got out, the one she'd been meaning to fix for months. She thought, "I'll ask Owen about that." And then she thought, "I'll ask Owen." And that was the whole sentence. That was enough. She went inside and turned off the porch light, and the June night was warm and quiet and completely, for the first time in longer than she could name, entirely her own.